Hi everyone, you're welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Amaka. In this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make a three-part corset with Queen Anne neckline. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified whenever I upload new videos. So let's get started. So this is my starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. So my bust point is 11 inches, under bust point is 14 inches, waist point is 16 inches, and the full length of this top is 22 inches and half-inch seam allowance. So I'm going to extend the points and I'll connect the points with horizontal lines. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take my neck measurement. So the neck width I'm working with is 3 inches and the neck depth is also 3 inches, and I'll connect the points. So my shoulder measurement divided by 2 gives you 7.5 inches plus half-inch seam allowance, that gives you 8 inches. So I'm marking 8 inches here. From this point, I'll come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant and I'll connect it to the neckline. So to impute my armhole depth, I'm going to be working with 8 inches, which is half of my armhole measurement. So I've marked 8 inches here. So I'm going to connect this point to this point. But before I do that, I'm going to check what I have here. Now, this 8 inches I have here, I'm bringing it down here. So I'm marking 8 inches and I'll connect the points. And I'll extend this point with horizontal line, just like this. So this is my chest point. So now I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. Now this is the midpoint. And from this midpoint, I'll come in by ½ inch. Now I'm going to take my bust measurement on my chest point. My bust circumference divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. And I'll connect this point to this point and this point to this point. Now I'm going to impute my dart, and for me to do that, I'm going to mark half of my nipple to nipple measurement here, which is 4 inches. So I'll mark 4 inches here and I'll mark 4 inches here again, and I'll connect the points. Now I'm going to label these lines. Now this is my chest point, my bust point, my under bust point, my waist point, and the full length of the top. On the waist point, I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides of this line. I'll do the same thing on the under bust point, and I'll do the same thing on the hem. And I'll connect the points. After that, I'll connect this point to this point and this point to this point, just like this. So on the chest point, I'm going to go up by 1.5 inches. And I'll extend the point with a horizontal line. Now I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides of this line, just like this. And I'll connect this point to this point and this point to this point, just like this. Now on the chest point, I'm going to mark ½ inch here. And I'm going to mark ½ inch on the under bust point, and I'll connect the points. Now on the chest point, I've already taken my bust measurement on the chest point. Now I'm going to, this 2 inches that I'm going to cut off from here, I'm going to return it here, plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. So on my under bust point, I'm going to mark my under bust circumference divided by 4, and that gives you 8 inches. Plus these 2 inches that I'm going to cut off, I'm returning it, plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. On my waist point, I'm going to take my waist measurement on my waist point. Now my actual waist measurement is 34 inches. But because I want to snatch my waist, so I'm going to subtract 2 inches from my actual waist measurement, and that gives you 32 inches. Now 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. So I'm going to mark 8 inches here, plus these 2 inches that I'm removing, I'm going to return it here, plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. On the hip point, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and that gives you 10.5 inches, plus these 2 inches dart that I'm going to cut off, I'm returning it, plus 1.5 inches seam allowance, and I'll connect the points. So after connecting the points, the next thing I'm going to do will be to impute the bust dart. Now the bust dart is the difference between the front waistline and the back waistline. The back waist is usually shorter than the front waist. Now my front waist is 16 inches while the back waist is 14.5 inches. So the difference between my front waist and my back waist is 1.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 1.5 inches here and I'll connect it to the bust point. So the next thing I'm going to do is to close this dart. So to close this dart, I'm going to open this dart. But before I do that, I'm going to create the first cup. Just like this. So for me to create the second cup, I'll have to close this dart. But before I do that, I'm going to shape the hem of my top. So here I'm marking 1.5 inches and I'll connect this 1.5 inches to this point. Just like this. And to close the bust dart, I have to open the waist dart. Please pay attention to what I'm doing. I'm closing the bust dart. So I'm going to sellotape it. So after that, I'm going to blend here. So the next thing I'm going to do is to create the second cup. But before I do that, I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. Now this is the midpoint of this line. And I'll connect this point to this point, just like this. Now I'm going to connect this point to this point, just like this. And I'll also connect this point to this point, just like this. Now I'm connecting this one to the armhole. So for the yoke, I'm going to connect this point to the neckline. Now this is optional. You can decide to work with 2 inches, 2.5 inches or 3 inches. But I'm using 3.5. Now this 3.5 is not standard. Like I said, you can use 2 inches, 2.5 inches, 3 inches. So I'll connect it to the neckline. So to avoid gaping, I'm going to mark a 1/4 inch here. And I'll connect it to this point. So for the shoulder, I'm going to add the shoulder seam allowance. I'm using 1/2 inch for my shoulder seam allowance. So to create the 3-part corset, from here I'm going to come down by 2 inches. From here I'm going to come down by 2.5 inches. And I'm also going to mark 2.5 inches here, while here I'll mark 2 inches. So I mark 2 inches here, 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches, and 2 inches. So I'm going to connect the points. And I'll connect this point to this point. And I'll cut it. So these are the cups. Now I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to sellotape the cup. Now I'm seeing that this part of the cup is pointy. So now this is what to do. In case if you experience something like this, there is no need to panic. All you need to do is just to fix it. All you need to do is just to do something like this, just to bring it up a little so that it won't be pointy. I'm just trying to blend that sharp edge. It shouldn't be an issue. All you just need to do is to redraft the cup. That's why it's called pattern drafting. In pattern drafting, you can easily correct things like this on your paper before transferring it to the fabric. So I'm going to place this on a fresh paper and I'll transfer it. So I'm going to bring back the cup and I'll label it. So I'll label this as 1, 2, and 3. So this is the center front and this is the side front. So I'm going to join it together and sellotape it. So for the back panel, now this is the starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. So shoulder to waist is 14.5 inches and the full length of the top is 20.5 inches and half-inch hemming allowance. So the back waist is 1.5 inches shorter than the front waist. The back waist is 14.5 inches while the front waist is 16 inches. So I'm going to extend the points. And I'll connect it with horizontal lines. So the back neck width is 3 inches and the back neck depth is 1 inch. This neckline is not the main neckline, it's only going to serve as a guide. So half of the shoulder measurement is 7.5 inches plus half-inch seam allowance gives you 8 inches. Now from this point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant and I'll connect it to the neckline. Now I'm going to mark half of my armhole measurement, which is 8 inches. And I'll connect the points. And I'm going to extend this point with a horizontal line. Now this is my chest point. So I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. Now this is the midpoint of this line. Let me label these lines. This is the chest point, my waist point, and the full length of the top. Now on the chest point, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4 and I'll connect the points just like this. Now take note, the back doesn't have zipper allowance and it's not going to have that as well. So on the full length of the top, I'm going to take my hip measurement on the full length of the top. My hip circumference divided by 4 gives you 10.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 10.5 inches here plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. On the waist point, I'm going to take my waist measurement on the waist point. My waist circumference divided by 4 gives you 8 inches plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. On the chest point, I've already taken my bust measurement. I'm going to add 1.5 inches seam allowance to it and I'll connect the points. You remember that on the front panel, I went up by 1.5 inches, so I'm doing the same thing on the back panel and I'll connect it to this point, just like this. Now on the chest point, I'm going to mark 2 inches here, and I'll mark 2 inches here. Now this top is not going to have zipper, it's going to be laced, so I'm going to cut off this part. Now these 2 inches that I'm cutting off is not standard. You can decide to cut off 1.5 inches, 2.5 inches. It all depends on what you want to use. So for the yoke, I'm going to mark 3 inches here, and I'll connect it to the neckline, just like this. So to avoid gaping, I'm going to come up by 1/4 inch, and I will mark. And I'll connect it to this point, just like you see me doing. So I'm cutting off this part. So I'm going to add my seam allowance. I'm using 1/2 inch for my shoulder seam allowance. And I'll cut it. Now this part is no longer useful to me. I'm cutting it off. Now here, let me just indicate that this is going to have eyelets. Just to indicate that there will be eyelets here. So I'm going to cut it. So this is the back panel. So this is the front panel, and this is the back. So I'm going to cut 2 of these, and I'll cut 2 of this. While for the front, this one is going to be on fold, and I'll add my seam allowance here and here. And I'm going to add my seam allowance all around this, and I'll add my seam allowance here and here. I'm going to add seam allowance here, I'll add here, here, and here. So I'm going to do all these things I just said and show you the outcome. I don't want this video to be too long, so we are going to stop here for now. Our next tutorial is going to be the sewing part of this corset. So if you found this tutorial helpful, please click on the like button. Share this video with your friends, share this video in your sewing groups, subscribe to my channel if you've not done so. Feel free to ask questions. I'll be in the comment section to answer all your questions. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.